We all recognize the United States as the best country in the world, but do you have a plan should things go sour? Here with us today is Joel Bowman, who is the editorial director of internationalman.com. Known throughout libertarian circles, Mr. Bowman has contributed thousands of articles for publications such as Mises.org and LewRockwell.com. One of the most unsettling political trends today is the call among so-called progressives to gut the rich with taxes. This really is the gateway for financial ruin, as we discuss in our special report, which you can read at crushthestreet.com/enemy. Now is the time to think beyond common categorizations and instead to live and invest as individuals. We detail several practical steps to help you navigate through our tyrannical system at crushthestreet.com/enemy. So without further ado, here's Joel Bowman.
Everyone, and welcome into crushthestreet.com. I'm Kenneth Amaduri, and I'm joined with a very interesting guest today. We're going to be speaking to Joel Bowman of internationalman.com. It's a collaborative effort with the legendary Doug Casey. And we're going to be having a conversation about, free market economics and, where our morality comes from in certain ways, and, maybe why certain societies that adopt these moralities maybe thrive and, live happier versus other ideologies, which I think we're going to have an interesting conversation about, again, where this moral anchor comes from. And also international living, international man is the website. So we're going to be jumping into these conversations here with legendary Joel Bowman. Joel, thanks for coming on Crush the Street with me today.
Janet, thanks so much for having me. I appreciate the opportunity.
Well, let's start off by maybe you giving us a little bit of an introduction to who you are, how you, what led you to where you are today in international living. I mean, this is pretty interesting stuff here, especially for a lot of us who live in the US who have been taught that this is the greatest country in the world. So it's kind of like, tyranny and a lack of patriotism to think about, not wanting to be, in the US per se, at least where I live.
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. I would expect that the United States is full of people whose ancestors left their own country of birth in pursuit of exactly the kind of liberty and opportunity that the United States now affords their progeny. So, with regards to patriotism, I think you kind of take that with you. I don't necessarily think that it's geographically bound, or that the individual doesn't have a responsibility unto himself and his family to travel where opportunity presents itself. That might be financial, it might be societal, it might be political, but I'm speaking to you today. You can probably hear a bunch of commotion outside, sirens and such. I'm talking to you today from Medellin in Colombia, and we see daily an overflow of expatriates from Venezuela for whom the political situation changed very rapidly and violently there. So I don't think these these people are unpatriotic because they're going where opportunity presented itself, and that's what a lot of people who ended up in the United States would have done back in the day.
Yeah. So in the US, for example, it's one of the only countries where your taxes follow you even if you leave. You have to completely expatriate. I think Puerto Rico, there's a little asterisk where you can do this for 5 years if you meet the requirements and you don't have to pay federal income tax. Of course, you got to live in Puerto Rico, which is completely decimated in many ways. So there's a different cost to have to do this. And my question is, what are your thoughts on this? And can the US get away with this indefinitely? Because it seems like they do this because of the financial well-being of the country, where it's like, okay, well, if you don't want to do this, go elsewhere. But, we're confident enough to charge for what the US offers. But how long can that go on for until something gives and people say, okay, well, shove it? we'll go live here because it's cheaper, more affordable, and the living standards are just as good.
Yeah, well, I think it's interesting that you brought up morality at the beginning of the discussion, because I could be wrong here, but I think it's Eritrea is the only other country on the planet. There may be one or two other little backwater tin cup dictatorships somewhere in Africa, perhaps, where your taxes follow you no matter where you go. And that really speaks to the way that the nation state views its citizens. It doesn't really view them as citizens, it views them more as subjects. That's particularly the case in the United States right now, where it assumes ownership of the individual, which is, in some degree, the very definition of slavery. When you assume ownership over the labor or person of another individual, then you're assuming ownership over a part of their life. And if an individual in the United States wants to go and live his life in the Bahamas or in Ghana or in the Solomon Islands, he should be, as a free individual and a free citizen, he should be free to do as he wishes. But since when you do expatriate the United States for good, the Uncle Sam considers you dead for all intents and purposes, and then you're subject to a state tax and all these other exit taxes. That the reality really speaks much more clearly to the way that the state views its citizens. But to your question about how long this can last, look, as long as the United States has the largest army in the world and has the IRS tracking people all over the globe, and as long as it assumes international jurisdiction over all the people who just by pure chance happen to have been born within its borders, then that's going to continue. But what I will say is it's going to, as the standard of living in the United States inevitably starts to come down in relation to some of the other countries around the planet, then I think you're going to see, and we are seeing, the numbers are very small at the moment, but we're going to see an increasing number of people who are doing the chicken run, as they say, and seeking opportunities elsewhere. And then once that hits a critical mass, say when the next crisis hits, then I think you're going to see the thumb screws tighten, and you're going to see things like capital controls. You're going to see things like people's travel documents being confiscated. You're going to see some curtailment to the freedom of movement that Americans have enjoyed without having to question too much in their recent past. And so that's going to be a rather a rude awakening, I would expect.
Joel, so let's go back to the morality thing. And this is something that I've been thinking about a lot lately. And that is, where does this gold standard of morality come from? And, if you grew up in a religious household, maybe you would think it's inspired by God. Like it was just something that was instilled in society. And, in many ways, that's been positive, I would say, to some people and societies to have some sort of moral anchor versus just some sort of chaos that people live by. But, if you don't believe in that, if you don't believe in any sort of inspiration and it's all randomness, where does this idea of societal morality and this cohesiveness come from?
Well, I think it's an ongoing discussion, of course, but I would say that I don't think that the modern day civic religion of nation states has any better claim over the origin of morality than does one or another particular church or belief system. Many of them, have conflicting belief systems, and most people have some idea of what it feels like to be atheistic towards Poseidon or Zeus or Vishnu. So most people understand what it's like to exist with an inherent morality in the absence of, say, Thor. And I would just extend that to the new civic religion. I don't think we need to be told that were it not for a congress of mammals who congregate in Washington, D.C. to pat themselves on the back every so often, that somehow in their absence we wouldn't know right from wrong. We know
this
it
has been passed down from us, wouldn't you agree, to a certain degree? And this is this thought process that we have, this morality that we all have, no matter what our beliefs are. has been passed down to us. It's been taught into us. And is it a
Well,
matter of just boiling it down to our basic needs, our needs for safety, our needs for eating and drinking and protecting our children, just these things that we have that are in our DNA to just have to have our needs. And then all
sure.
of these things, these moral anchors are built around that. Wouldn't you agree with that to a certain degree?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that there's obviously a certain biology to it. It's morality in a way is evolutionary. You know, we come to work out what the best way to deal with people is. You know, we come to discover that cooperation is preferable to coercion, for example, because coercion doesn't work out so well. All-out war is not generally the way to advance the human project, and so we see that going all the way back, certainly a long way before the iteration of the modern nation state, which is a relatively new concept. I mean, this is something that's only a few hundred years old. Before that, we had principalities and city-states and things like that. Going back to the Greeks, we had we had Sparta at war with Athens, at war with Corinth, and so we had much smaller collectives of individuals. But the idea that we could all, that we all would have gotten to the stage where where a handful of people thought that it might be a good idea to write up the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, Bill of Rights, etc. That the idea that we could have even gotten that far, thinking that that murder and slaughter and non-adherence to something as basic as the non-aggression principle, for example, is patently untrue. We wouldn't be here having this discussion if that weren't the case.
Yeah. So let's kind of switch back over to this taxation thing, and maybe it'll circle back down to morality and whatnot. And I mean, for what I'm about to say, I think a guy like Bernie Sanders might, cheer me on initially on this. It just, we wouldn't have the same conclusions. But I know wealthy people that are so rich that they can afford to live in a state, just here in the US, they're not going to get away from federal taxes, but certain high oppressive state income taxes like Texas or Nevada or Florida have their primary residence there, but have their, $1 million mansion in California too, in this highly oppressive tax state, but not have to deal with the oppressive 13% income tax because they're so wealthy that they're able to, sidestep it. And so this is an interesting thing to me. It really goes to show how, in so many ways, these oppressive laws hurt the middle class more than it does the 1/10 of 1% rich people in this world. And so, I mean, could you touch on that? I mean, whatever thoughts might have come to your head as I was saying these things, can you touch on this?
Yeah, well, you mentioned Bernie Sanders and others of his ilk, AOC and the rest of the usual suspects. These people seem to be in a game of one-upsmanship for who can soak the rich for the most taxes. There's a wealth tax being suggested. There's progressive income taxes of 70, 80% and beyond for the wealthiest echelon of society. And the people who propose these rather drastic measures like to point to recent history and say, well, we had a top tax bracket of 90%, not so long ago. What they failed to mention, of course, conveniently, is that the wealthy never paid this amount of tax. The wealthy never paid 90%, as part of their top income bracket. They always, found ways to, they would go on a cruise for a few weeks around the Caribbean and attend a small investment conference on the cruise and write it off as a tax deduction. There are thousands of ways that people with means will be able to escape even the most onerous taxes. But let's assume, just for the sake of discussion, that these avenues were not open to the very wealthiest people in the country. Let's assume for a second that somehow even somebody as as patently incompetent as Bernie Sanders, were somehow able to really soak the rich. And let's imagine not just soak the rich, let's imagine he was able to drown them. Let's imagine he was able to confiscate all of the wealth of the entire billionaire class. Forbes came out with a list of billionaires in the United States in 2016 that said the United States has about 450 billionaires with a net worth of $2.4 trillion. Those numbers are 2016, so let's imagine that they've doubled since then, which I think is rather generous. So let's imagine now that you could go out and confiscate. You storm the corporate boardrooms, you confiscate the penthouses, you somehow confiscate all of the bank accounts and the gold vaults, both onshore and offshore, and you manage to get your hands on the entire net worth of the billionaire, much hated billionaire class in the United States. Well, assuming that net worth had doubled since 2016, you've only got 1 year worth of the national budget. That's $4.8 trillion. That's the budget that President Trump just handed down for the fiscal year 2019. So even if you got rid of, even if you soaked, even if you outright drowned and confiscated every single dollar of wealth that the billionaire class had, you can only keep the lights on for 1 year. And then what happens after 1 year? Well, then you've got yawning deficits again, the debt starts to explode again. And when you turn around to, discover who might help dig you out of this conflagration and this mess, well, all of your billionaires, all of the productive class are at the bottom of the ocean staring vacantly back at you.
So it really sounds to me, and as I've wrapped my minds around this for years now, it's a matter of who's going to take the longest to drown. Who's got the strongest ship, the cleanest shirt in the basket of laundry, all these analogies we can use. But, it's not like people can completely opt out. And that's what makes, the U.S. artificially sustained through all of this chaos. It's just people don't really have another alternative, an easy alternative. I mean, there are ways to completely pull the plug, as you talk about, but to do this in mass quantities, it's going to be very difficult, which is, I think, what sustains the United States. So, I mean, if you would, then let's talk the economy a little bit of the U.S., maybe as it pertains to precious metals. What is your opinion on what is going on right now with the strongest country on earth? And, how much longer do you anticipate this to last? And what should people be doing to prepare for it? I mean, that's ultimately the main question, the actionable question.
Right. Yeah. Well, I would say that panic now, beat the rush is probably a pretty good modus operandi here. Look, it's if you consider yourself as part of a herd, then and the herd is rushing for the door or the egress, then that's going to be, you shouldn't be surprised if you get trampled underfoot. The idea here is not to think of yourself as part of the middle class or the upper middle class or working class or whatever categorization politicians would like to corral you in. The idea is to think as an individual. And there are plenty of opportunities around the world for individuals to, let's say, you brought up financial concerns. There's plenty of opportunities to store precious metals, not just within the United States, which, as we saw in the 1930s when FDR confiscated gold through basically presidential edict, you want that double protection of storing your gold offshore. We talk about certain ways to do that in International Man, but there are vaults in the Cayman Islands, there are options in Singapore and Hong Kong, and that gives you a double layer of protection whereby you have both financial diversification outside of the fiat currency, all of which eventually hit rock bottom, and you have the additional diversification of outside of political entities. So you get beyond Uncle Sam's reach a couple of ways there. That's one way that you can diversify. I think a lot of people, when they hear about internationalization, or they first come to reading International Man, they get the idea that that it has to be wholesale expatriation, that they have to sell their house tomorrow, say goodbye to the family, some teary farewell at the train station before they embark on some global adventure, never to look back. It's really incremental, and it's something that you have to tailor towards your individual situation. So for some people, that will mean absolute expatriation. It'll mean the most extreme version of that. But for many other people, it may simply mean moving some portion of their wealth into a precious metal, or perhaps an alternative free market currency like a cryptocurrency. Or it may mean, hey, let's have a look at some options to purchase a little real estate abroad, maybe a little bolt hole somewhere down in South America, where if times get really tough, you can, you've got a nice place where the sun shines, and you can wake up to a view of the Pacific Ocean. Whatever floats your boat, but you should really tailor it to your individual needs and get out of the mentality of thinking like one of the herd.
So Joel, you alluded to it right there. I wanted to kind of close on this, and that's just simply, what are some of the most ideal places to internationalize your life? And you touched on it, that it can be from completely expatriating, maybe moving some money around, internationalizing your finances. But I kind of want to touch on, ideal places to live, economic-wise, weather-wise, lifestyle-wise. In your experience, what are some of the best places that you would consider and recommend living abroad, if you were to recommend that? And I know you do.
Right. Well, I mean, the interesting thing is that this changes all the time. The criteria for each individual will be more or less the same. They want, good, if they're somewhat advanced in age, they might want affordable, high quality healthcare. If they're a little younger, if they're a family age, they might want, good child's care and, good security, that kind of thing. So the criteria may remain pretty similar, but the world is in flux, and geopolitics happens, and it happens quickly oftentimes. So the list of contenders for where to move is going to change in accordance with those various pressures. So to be a little more specific to your question, I'm here in Colombia right now. This is one of my favorite countries in South America, even though Medellin is not one of my favorite cities in even Colombia. But there's a good cost of living to quality of living ratio here. You can find any climate that suits your needs, from high Andean mountain living to bi-coastal living. You can be on the Pacific or on the Caribbean. It's a short flight from the United States. Spanish is not particularly difficult to pick up, even for the linguistically challenged. But Colombia has a lot to offer. I would also look a little further south. I'm considering another relocation down to Argentina a little later. Everything comes at a price, and you'd buy anything for the right price. So Argentina right now, as your viewers probably know, have experienced a pretty drastic devaluation in their currency over the last year. That seems to be accelerating. I think dropped about 6% in a single week just recently. So for people who are moving abroad or considering spending some time abroad or some of their money abroad, Argentina essentially just got 6% cheaper in a week. And it's gotten, maybe 50% cheaper or so in dollar terms over the last year. So, I would be looking at things like potential for currency arbitrage when you move abroad. Looking at things like potential political fallouts. There's a bunch of things that will go into an individual's consideration. But Argentina has, I find it a very sophisticated society for a very good price, and that for me is my next destination in any case.
Well, I'm a little biased. My mom was born and raised in Argentina, but I've also heard the stories of the corruption of government, the devaluing of the currency, the inflation, the hyperinflation, and the freezing of the bank accounts as well. So I got two devils on my shoulder talking to me about Argentina.
Well, I would, if I may, just a quick word on exactly that point. What I find very refreshing in Argentina, and you perhaps know this very well already, is that perhaps because of those, those very trying political episodes where, as you mentioned, there were, bank account confiscations and hyperinflations, and certainly I would recommend that anybody keep a significant portion of their wealth in an Argentine bank account by any means. But what that has done, what those episodes have done, is they've instilled in the Argentine population, to get back to the morality question that we were talking about before, they've instilled in the Argentine population a very healthy distrust of authority and distrust of state actors and distrust of government. And in other places around the world, I was born in Australia. You probably have a lot of Canadian and US viewers. That really doesn't exist. There's not a reflexive distrust and questioning of authority, which I think is very, very healthy for any society. And in Argentina, that is very robust. Tax minimization is behind perhaps football and rampant Catholicism, the national sport. They're very distrustful of the government, and that's very, very refreshing to see.
Yeah. My grandfather passed away with cash under his mattress. And I think a lot of what you're talking about got instilled into me, which is why I run a channel which is all about opting out of conventional wisdom, free markets, and, in a lot of ways, distrust of government. And I guess I wouldn't equate that with lack of patriotism, although I don't have an allegiance to something particularly that is ultimately negative for me and my family. But having said that, Joel, this was a really refreshing conversation. Not as economic as we normally discuss here at Crush the Street, but it was a great sidestep, a detour to really talk about the philosophy of why we do what we do and kind of where it comes from. And, hopefully our readers and our listeners will listen to what we discussed today and, have different ideas, different epiphanies that was able to stem from the conversation that we had today. So if people want to learn more about what you do, your writings, the things that you have to offer, where can they go and what can they expect to find?
Well, yeah, first of all, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate the opportunity to chat with you today. It was a real pleasure. For readers and viewers who want to check us out, they can go to internationalman.com. We've got a free e-letter there. We go out 5 days a week with a host of experts that cover things from international speculation, financial investments, all the way through to options for second citizenships, second, third, fifth passports, ways to store gold and precious metals offshore. And then, of course, we have plenty to say about the political circus ongoing in the U.S. and the West, and we take no prisoners with regards to political sensitivity. So, not for the emotional hemophiliac brigade, but all others welcome.
Well, Joel, thanks for coming on Crush the Street. It was a real pleasure. I hope you come back and we can continue this conversation, especially as things evolve over the next few months here. So thanks for coming on Crush the Street.
A pleasure. Thanks for having me.